Hey everybody, it is Chris, and I want to talk a little bit today about rules in the 2024 Player's Handbook as well as the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide that might not be completely balanced, and what we as players and Dungeon Masters can do about it. I've identified a few things I want to talk about today. It's probably not an exhaustive list. If there are things you want me to talk about, by all means, give me some suggestions in the comments below. But today I'm going to talk about four things and solutions that I have either tested or punched some math for that I think are just fine, or solutions that the designers have already offered for us. And I'm going to talk about four different subjects today. I'm going to talk about Conjure Minor Elementals. I'm going to talk about Conjure Woodland Beings and other emanation spells like Spirit Guardians. I'm going to talk about spike growth, and I'm going to talk about the magic item crafting rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide. All four of these have already been identified as possible things that can be exploited. And if your players are good players, maybe you don't need to worry about any of this stuff. But you never know. Yeah, sometimes things happen and they weren't even intended to happen by players. And the next thing you know, you have a bunch of characters that are defined by their magic items rather than by their classes and the character options. And it can feel kind of bad for the players too. I do think that avoiding these things, even before they become a problem, isn't such a bad idea. So we're going to start by talking about Conjure Minor Elementals. So this is the first spell that I noticed in the 2024 Player's Handbook that I was concerned about. So Conjure Minor Elementals, it is concentration, lasts up to 10 minutes, action to cast. You conjure spirits from the elemental planes that flit around you in a 15-foot emanation for the duration. Until the spell ends, any attack you make deals an extra 2d8 damage when you hit a creature in the emanation. The damage is acid, cold, fire, or lightning, your choice when you make the attack. In addition, the ground in the emanation is difficult terrain for your enemies. So this is a good spell. I don't think this is a broken spell. It requires an action to cast. It requires your concentration to maintain. It has nice that you can switch your damage types, so the damage is reasonably reliable. But the range is very limited. It has to be a creature within 15 feet. And it is an action to cast, so if you find yourself kind of in combat, that's your first round used up. In order to set this up, if you know that you're going into combat, you could precast it, of course. But overall, I think this is a good spell. I don't think it's a broken spell. This is the part I think is broken. The upcasting part. Using a higher level spell slot, the damage increases by 2d8 for each spell slot level above 4. This is too much. Now, if you are playing a character that only makes one attack per round, for whatever reason, this might not be a problem. The issue is when you start compiling multiple attacks per round, and there's lots of ways you can do that. You can be a straight class druid, and maybe you're a stars druid. Well, your archer form is going to give you an additional attack every round, so now you're up to 2. If you can figure out a way to do a reaction attack, you could be up to 3. But even with 2, this can get out of control. With wizard, there's bladesinger, they have extra attack. With druid, there's moon druids, and they get multi-attack. And of course, bards can access this spell as well with magical secrets, and they have valor bards. Valor bards can get extra attack as well as something like Polearm Master or use 2-weapon fighting. And so you can get a lot of attacks with this huge damage numbers. And I am not just guessing here. I've punched the math on this, and so I'm going to reference a previous video. In a previous video, I covered damage for bards. And one of the things I figured I had to do with bards is do a valid bard and see just how bad Conjure Minor Elementals is. So what I've got here is the mathematical calculations I did for that video. I've just got level 20 up here. And you can see here what I cast. And you can see here the math I did to figure out how much it would do. And it ended up being 140 points of damage a round. Now, the most any other build had done up to that point was around 90 points of damage a round. So we're talking about a huge increase over everything else. Everything else. Nothing else came close to what this build using Conjure Minor Elementals was able to achieve. In fact, I'll show you on a graph. So on this graph, we have two lines. The blue line represents my baseline. My baseline is a warlock using Pact of the Blade and a great sword, and they use their spell slots to do Eldritch Smites. Okay, so very, very simple build. And we can see the blue line here, and it slowly increases with level, and by level 20, it's doing about 62 points of damage a round, which isn't a huge amount of damage. The baseline is supposed to be kind of a starting point. We can definitely do better than the baseline with all kinds of characters. With the Bard, what we see is the red line, and we can see that the Bard falls below baseline, and this is because Bards tend to be bad at single target damage. In fact, before Conjure Minor Elementals, they're the worst class in the game at single target damage. And it just gets worse at level 5. They catch up a little bit at 7 because this is a Valor Bard that took a fighter dip. So this is when they get their extra attack. But they're still below baseline. And they're below baseline until 10 because this is a Valor Bard that took a fighter dip. They don't get magical secrets until level 11. At level 11, they take Conjure Minor Elementals and they use their higher level spell slots to cast Conjure Minor Elementals. And they immediately jump above baseline. But they are not a lot above baseline. At level 11, baseline's 30.9 and the Valor Bard is doing 36.6. That's not really a problem, right? Same at level 12. Damage isn't that much higher. So that's because Conjure Minor Elementals in its base form isn't really a problem. It's a good spell, but it's not a problem spell yet. When it becomes a problem spell is, like I said, that bottom part with the scaling. So this Valor Bard scales that spell, and we can just see it take off like a rocket, and it finishes off at the 142.2 points of damage per round. And that's a problem. So in a video I did a while ago where I identified this as an issue, I suggested a possible house rule. I said, if we could look back at the original spell, I said maybe this bottom part should say 1d8 for every 2 spell slot levels. Because that's what we see with Spirit Shroud, and we've had Spirit Shroud for a while now. And Spirit Shroud is an okay spell, but I've never seen it be a problem. So maybe that's the solution. And I had a lot of comments in that video asking me, how the math looked. And I hadn't done the math. So I really couldn't say. I was just kind of spitballing a possible solution. So I figured I should do the math and see if that solution really does work. So that's what I did. So back to our Bard build. At level 20, you're going to see some yellow. And the yellow is my corrections, or my house rule applies. So we have the way that the damage has changed and the math to figure out what that new damage is. And I did that at every level that it applied to. Of course, the first 10 levels it doesn't because it's the same. So the green line represents the house rule damage. And we can see levels 1 through 10, it's the same as the Bard without the house rule because the house rule doesn't apply yet until we have Conjure Minor Elementals. Then at level 11, we can see that the house ruled one basically matches the baseline. And that's maybe a little lower than I would have liked it, but that's okay. Level 12, it's a little below the baseline. Then it pulls ahead at 13. And by level 14, it's doing all right. And by level 18, it's doing pretty good. And by level 20, we're talking 88.1 points of damage around, which is right in that ballpark of where everybody else is at that point, or anyone who does decent damage in tier 4. That's where they are at that point. So I don't think this is a big problem. If you want to do a lot of single target damage, upcasting seems to be worthwhile, and you can do pretty good damage at level 20, though you will still have the regular issues of a Bard that until you get Conjure Minor Elemental, single target damage isn't your thing. Of course, if you're a Bard, other things are your thing, so that's not really a problem. And I did wanted to just look at how this compared to, because I did another Bard build. I did a Bard build that didn't use Conjure Minor Elementals to see how it would do. And so what I did is I used Summoning instead. I used Summon Celestial, and I just want to compare that to these builds. And so that's the purple line. And if we look, we can see it pretty much matches the other Bards. until level 11. And the level 11 is where we see the non-house ruled Conjure Minor Elementals build pull away and then take off at level 13. But here we see the purple and the green line very, very close. The green line pulls a little bit ahead at 14 and a lot more ahead at 18. And that is because Foresight does a lot more for Conjure Minor Elementals than it does for Summon Spell. That's why it jumps so much at 18. But, you know, the non Conjure Minor Elementals Bard damage wasn't that great. So I'm okay with this kind of increase. You know, then it becomes a nice option for a Bard that wants to do single target damage. So I think the house rule works okay. So if you wanted to implement that house rule, this is what it would look like. So the yellow, I've just put house ruled, and I have shown in yellow what has changed. Everything else is exactly the same, and that seems to fix the issue. All right, let's talk about Conjure Woodland Beings. So here is Conjure Woodland Beings. The wording on Conjure Woodland Beings is very similar to Spirit Guardians, and basically the way it works is it's an action to cast, last 10 minutes, uses your concentration. It says you conjure nature spirits that flit around you in a 10-foot emanation for the duration. Whenever the emanation enters the space of a creature you can see, and whenever a creature you can see enters the emanation or ends its turn there, you can force that creature to make a wisdom saving throw. Creature takes 5d8 force damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. Creature makes its save only once per turn. In addition, you can take the disengage action as a bonus action for the spell's duration. Damage increases by a d8 for each spell slot level above 5. Let's look at this on a battle map, and I'm going to show you how I think it's supposed to work and what the issue is. So here we have our druid, and the green emanation around them is Conjure Woodland Beings, and they're in combat with a couple driders. So on their turn, they can move, say, to here, and then this strider will take some damage, and then they can move up to here, and then this Drider will take some damage. And that's pretty much it until the Drider's turn. And on the Drider's turn, if this Drider doesn't move out of the emanation before the end of their turn, they'll take damage again. If this Drider moves into the emanation to attack, they'll take damage again. Or they could just stay outside and not take any damage at all. Or this one can move out and not take damage more than the first time on the turn. And in some ways, this makes more sense than the 2014 version, where you could push a creature in and it would take damage, and then at the start of its turn it would take damage again. Now they have to actually wait until the end of their turn, so they can move out and they only take the damage once. Here's where the problem comes in. Let's say our druid has their turn, so they move to here, and the bottom one takes damage, and then they move up to here, and the top one takes damage. And then they move back to here, and they ready an action to move. According to the ready action, and I'm bringing this up because last time I mentioned this, a number of people told me that you can't ready an action to move. Yes, you can. So here it is. It says, first you decide what perceivable circumstances will trigger your reaction. Then you choose the action you'll take in response to that trigger, or choose to move up to your speed in response to it. So you can move up to your speed as a readied action. So we just wait until, the next person takes their turn, and then we take our readied action, and then we move to here, and the top one takes damage again, and then we move down to here, and the bottom one takes damage again, and then we move back out again. Then the monk comes and grapples us, and they move us here, and they move us here, and they move us here, and then the fighter comes and grapples us and does the same thing. And even the wizard, because, if they're grappling us, it's going to work automatically because we can choose to fail our save. And the summoned creatures can do it. And really, the number of times we inflict the damage is really only limited by the number of creatures that we have in the initiative order. And so the damage can occur over and over and over again. And I have seen this in play. I have experienced it. We tested it specifically because we were wondering how broken it would be. It's very, very broken. And so I did that video, and I'll tell you what, there was one response that had way more proliferation than any other response, and that was, the fix is that creatures can only take the damage once per round. So the idea would be, once we've moved up here, this creature has just taken the damage. For the rest of this round, it can't take damage again. I like that idea in principle. I think it doesn't work so hot in practice, or I don't think it would work in practice, because what's going to happen is on my turn, let's say I move up and do damage to this one and move away. Well, now I need to keep track that this one has taken the damage and this one has not taken the damage. And that might not be too bad with, 2 creatures. But if we start having lots of creatures and I have to keep track of which ones have taken damage and which ones haven't every round, I think that is going to be just extra work that I don't want to have to do. There's got to be an easier solution. Now, one of the solutions suggested is we could just go back to the way these things are worded in 2014, where they don't take damage if you move in, but they take damage at the start of their turn, and they take damage if they enter the area. That can work as well. However, I will point out that, and we know this already because we've seen this for years and years and years, is that you push a creature in and it takes damage, and then at the start of its turn it takes damage again, and that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. Also, I think the idea was they wanted to be like Baldur's Gate 3, where you could run around and hit the creatures, and that was kind of fun. I think we can maintain that. I think we can make it easy, and I think we don't need to make a big change to this spell. And I've already done this in my games, and so far, so good. And I think for most players, they won't even notice the difference. So this is what I did. So this is my house ruled version, and I have added 3 words, and they are in yellow. And so it reads, you conjure nature spirits that flit around you in a 10-foot emanation for the duration. Whenever the emanation enters the space of a creature you can see on your turn, and whenever a creature you can see enters the emanation or ends its turn there, you can force the creature to make a wisdom saving throw. That seems to do it. Now you can't have, everybody grapple you and pull you in and out again and do the damage over and over and over again. It just prevents that. I think for most players, this is how they were going to play it anyways. I think this is how it was intended to work. This is pretty much how it works with Baldur's Gate 3, so you are getting the Baldur's Gate 3 experience. It is still different and new to the 2014 version, so we're getting a different version. I think this works. And this is still a very, very powerful spell. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think it's busted anymore. There's no exploit that gets it out of control anymore. So that is my proposed solution for that. But, again, if it's not going to be an issue at your table anyway, then don't worry about it. Now we're going to talk about Cheese Grater. Okay, so Cheese Grater is something I've talked about on this channel before. I have also demonstrated it. If you want to go to the CMCC Builds channel, you can see me run a gauntlet at 10th level where I use the Cheese Grater strategy and it wrecked, right? It's just, you kill the creature, but you don't just kill it, you kill it like 5 times over. And the way it works is this. You start with a Spike Growth spell, which I'm representing by the blue square on this map. Now, it could be a circle, it could be a square, I don't care. All right, it doesn't really matter at all. I use the square because it's easier to draw. So we have a Drider, and we have cast Spike Growth, Driders in the Spike Growth. So the way Cheese Grater works is our character moves up to the Drider, and they grapple them. And, depending on what our character is, even with the changes to the rules, we can probably get that grapple. Monks, if they really want to grapple somebody, they're going to grapple them by the end of their turn. And then what we do is we move. And the way Spike Growth is worded is whenever a creature moves 5 feet within a Spike Growth, they take 2d4 damage. So if they move 10 feet, they take 4d4. If they move 15 feet, they take 6d4. And it keeps going and going and going until it gets crazy, because there are things you can do in the game to get your movement speed to just ridiculously high amounts. And that's the idea with Cheese Grater, is that you're going to set this up. The grappler makes sure their speed is going to be just these massive, massive, massive amounts. And then what they do is they move over here. The Drider moves with them. The Drider takes 44 damage. Then they move back here, and the Drider moves with them, and the Drider takes 44 damage. And they keep doing it over and over and over again until they run out of movement. And then they're going to dash and do it again. And then they'll use their hasted action and do it again, and over and over and over and over again. And you can get 1,000 points of damage. And, you don't even need to be that high a level to get into those kind of damage ranges. And what I have seen is if I am running one-shots and Cheese Grater is going to be used, it becomes a problem. It makes it overly easy for all the combats to be beaten, and it takes over. Everybody else just waits around while cheese grater happens, and I don't think that's fun for a lot of players, so I wanted to get rid of it. And I have figured out a way that I think takes care of the problem. So I've been doing this for the last couple months, and so far so good. So what I have always done with grapple is if you grapple somebody, I assume their position relative to you stays the same. So if you move here, they move here, and if you move here, they move here. Okay, so their position related to you always remains the same. I did that because it's easy. That's the easy way to run it, and the rules don't tell us what to do in regards to the position of the enemies with the players. So I assume, I guess it stays the same, and it's easy to do, so that's the way we should do it. However, that causes this issue. So what I've done to fix the issue, or at least implement a fix for now, is I run grapples so that they're more intuitive, so that, what we imagine is happening makes a little more sense. And what I do is basically, if you're going to grapple and drag, you have to drag. So if you move to here, the rider doesn't move. They're still within your reach, right? So you haven't needed to grapple them yet. Basically, you're grabbing them and you've started to move, and they're still there. Okay? And then we keep moving. They're still within reach. They don't move. We keep moving. Now they are no longer in reach. So now they have to move to stay within the grapple. And there's two places that make sense for them to move. There or there. Because these are the two ways that they could move only 5 feet while still being within reach of your grapple. And this is what I do. The creature being grappled decides which one. So the Drider can choose to go down here, and now they're out of the spike growth. This is, I set this up so they could be out of the spike growth right away, but let's say they're up here, and we grapple them here. Well, we move here, and they can move to here, they take the damage. We move to here, they move to here, they no longer take the damage. So it limits how much you can drag them through spike growth, but it's limited how much you can drag them through spike growth. And to me, it makes kind of sense that the grappled creature, they're being dragged, but they can kind of pull back and forth, trying to get out. I don't know. That makes sense to me, and it's fixed the problem. Now, there is potentially still a problem with flying creatures going over this. Maybe there's some kind of flight exploit, but I haven't encountered that yet. I do think that's a lot harder to implement. So far, just having grapple makes sense. Like, think about where that grapple creature would end up when you move. Fixes cheese grater, at least so far in my experience. We're going to talk about one more subject. This one's really quick and really easy. But I have seen now multiple creators talk about the issues with the Dungeon Master's Guide crafting rules and how they're broken. How players can exploit these rules, and you can create uncommon items for 200 gold pieces, or is it buy them for 200 gold pieces? And you can pick from all these items, and there's some that are really, really good. Look at the Enspelled items, for example. And so once you choose, every character is going to have their flying broomstick, and every character is going to have all their Enspelled stuff. You're going to have this situation where the magic items define the character rather than, your class and your class options and the feat options and the spells you chose, and that kind of sucks. Maybe, I don't want to speak for you. Maybe at your table, that's what you love to do. But for me, I that's not what I want. I worked hard on my character and how I envision them, and I don't want them to be just the same collection of magic items that are super powerful that everybody else picked. The solution for this is so easy, and Chris Perkins talked about it before the Dungeon Master's Guide ever came out. So, let's just hear what he has to say.
Yes, and one of the reasons why these rules are in the Dungeon Master's Guide instead of the Player's Handbook with the other magic item crafting rules is because this is unlocked by the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master determines whether or not the materials are available, whether or not the characters can build these items.
Okay, I think that covers it, doesn't it? And I've had this debate with a certain segment of the community for years now about whether the Dungeon Master's Guide is a player resource. If players can just go in and shop it and do what they want with the rules in there. And I've always figured that there's two books. You got a Player's Handbook and a Dungeon Master's Guide. And I figure they're different books for different reasons. Because the Player's Handbook is for everybody. Dungeon Master is technically a player too. But the Dungeon Master's Guide is for the Dungeon Master to decide what they want to do with the rules inside. And not for the players to just choose whatever they want. And so, yeah, the Dungeon Master could not use crafting at all. That's up to them. Or, and I think this makes more sense because I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, is they can be selective. You want to craft your own +1 magic weapon? Great. You want to craft broomsticks of flying for the entire party? That's maybe an issue. So you can just kind of pick and choose. Yes, you have the materials for these things. No, you're not going to find materials for those things. Problem solved. If you are unsure which things are broken and which ones aren't, then for anything you're unsure of, hold off. Say no materials available for now, and once you get a good feel for it, you can make a decision or never make a decision, and you can just put it off forever. The stuff you're sure about, you can allow, or not allow any of it if that's what you choose. But fixing this problem, it never really needed a fix because they've told us what we're supposed to do with it since before we ever had the resource. And this assumption that players could just access whatever they wanted, regardless of the Dungeon Master, blatantly ignored what the designers told us about that rule and crafting rules in general. Okay, so that's the easiest fix that I think we could possibly have, is simply listen to the designers and what they tell us about that part of the rules. Could they have done a better job of balancing magic items and the crafting rules? Maybe. I mean, I think it's tough. I actually think it's really tough to balance those things well. But it's not super balanced. Certainly as a DM, I would highly recommend other DMs not just allow crafting carte blanche. I think that is just a recipe for disaster. But, that's just my suggestion to you. Those are the 4 things I wanted to talk about today. Once again, if there's other things you want me to talk about, let me know. Otherwise, till next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.